Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Koma T, Public Information Officer with San Francisco Public Works. Thank you for joining us today for the next hour, where we will be sharing updates about the Better Market Street project. This meeting is being recorded. Before we get started, I will now ask Kim from MTA, who will go over today's meeting structure and how we will be taking public comment. Kim, could you please explain the call-in process?
I'm Kim and I'm from MTA. The comment session will work as follows. I will be pressing star 2, and there will be an announcement made for everyone who needs to make a comment to press 10 to be queued up. Then I will wait a minute or two, and I will press 10 and your comment will be heard. After your comment is made, you will automatically be muted on the call.
Great, thank you, Kim. So again, we will be able to take public comments when you call in to the toll-free 188 number listed on the screen. You may also email your public comment or feedback to bettermarketstreet@sfdpw.org. We will show this screen again when we are ready for Q&A. So now let me please introduce the project team. Joining us today, we have Christina Olay from San Francisco Public Works, Flora Law, Ophelia Lau, Nick Ansel, and Janet Pioy. Part of the SFMTA team, we have Britt Tanner, Mariana McGuire, Peter Gabancho. From SFPUC, we have Aziza Jackson and Manfred Wong. And from SF Planning, we have Ben Caldwell. We are also honored today to have join us Public Works Acting Director Alaric de Graffenrie and SFMTA Director Jeffrey Tumlin, who will now both say a few words. Alaric?
Thanks, Koma. I just want to say, first off, I just want to thank everyone for their participation in the project thus far. That includes both in the city team, as along with the public. I know that this has been as a long journey for everyone involved, and I want to first acknowledge that we did introduce some changes here, and I want to, and I'm sure that is as a bit shocking, but at the same time, I just want you all to know that and those changes were made with the projects and the best interest at heart, in trying to balance the needs of the business owners, the cyclists, and the pedestrians, and really in the city more generally, with and the underlying and the infrastructure that ever needs to be is maintained and repaired. As my colleagues will be providing you with as a presentation later about in the project and as where we're at. But again, I just want to say and thank you all for as your interest in the project, and I'm looking forward to us all being able and to work on this going forward. With that said, I will pass it off to Jeff.
Thanks, Alaric. Ever since Jasper O'Farrell laid out Market Street over 150 years ago, it has been the most important street for every single mode of transportation. It's the street where all of the grids of San Francisco collide. It's 120 feet wide. It's where the transit system got started and spread out across the dunes of San Francisco. And as a result of it being the place where our streetcar system spread from, it's also the place where all of the reasonably level bike routes collide. It is also, of course, the greatest concentration of services and density in San Francisco, and is therefore the most important street for pedestrians. I want to recognize that San Francisco has been working on Market Street for 150 years, and that advocates and all of the departments represented here today have been working on a grand vision of Market Street for the last 20 years. We don't take changes.
Your line is now unmuted.
Previous designs lightly, and I want to make sure that you all understand what we're trying to do here. First of all, we have a federal grant that we have to expend. We're also in a state of financial catastrophe that is likely going to get significantly worse, as of the news of today. We have to spend that money. And so we're trying to focus that money on mostly major infrastructure repair within the curbs between 5th and 8th. What we're doing with this work does not preclude thinking about how bikes are handled in the corridor. It does not preclude a sidewalk level bikeway. That said, the success of the Better Market Street Quick Build project back in January, which resulted in a greater than 25% increase in bike ridership, means that a 5 to 8 foot wide cycle track at the sidewalk level cannot accommodate anywhere near the level of bike ridership that we saw last year, let alone what San Francisco needs to be a great city, what Market Street needs to be for a great bike corridor. And moreover, the sort of mode shift that is going to be essential if San Francisco's economic recovery is going to be supported in light of what the Muni system is facing. My vision for Market Street is a street that is our great civic corridor, but also accommodates the reality of the needs for transit, the reality of a dramatic increase in bike ridership, far more than what we saw back in January, and also the need to keep pedestrians safe and to keep scooters and cyclists who don't fit in the cycle track from taking over the entire sidewalk. So I want to invite you all to ask tough questions, to comment however you want, but also to recognize the real constraints of the corridor, including the fact that every place there is a BART portal, the cycle track is narrowed to 5 feet, which means that people can only ride single file. That is not nearly enough to accommodate the vision for San Francisco that I want to see. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to our staff team who will give you a detailed presentation about our current work as well as next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Alec, and thank you, Jeff. So now, please let me welcome to the call to begin our presentation, Christina Olay, Project Manager for the Better Market Street project.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Olea with San Francisco Public Works, and I am the Better Market Street Project Manager. As you probably know already,
Can you hear me?
Better Market Street is a joint project with 5 city departments, including San Francisco Public Works, the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, the Planning Department, and the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We're also working closely with the Mayor's Office on Disability and the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Better Market Street started 10 years ago when these 5 departments came together to discuss improvements for Market Street. 10 years ago, we set our goals, and those goals stand with us today. The goals include improving place, mobility, including safety and accessibility, and supporting economic development along the corridor. We want a street that is designed to reduce the number of traffic collisions and injuries. We want to improve performance and reliability of our transit system. We have to upgrade our infrastructure and install new infrastructure. And we want an active sidewalk and vibrant street that identifies Market Street as the city's preeminent ceremonial street. We do have some difficult design changes that we're presenting this month to our stakeholders. Those changes were not made lightly and are based on a few different things that have happened since the last time that we met. As you know, in January, Market Street went car-free as part of our implementation of Quick Build. Immediately following Quick Build's implementation, we saw up to 12% reduction in Muni travel time. And we also saw a 25% increase in cycling along the corridor. That was until shelter in place was ordered. But we were seeing up to 800 bicyclists in the peak hour. This growth of bicycle volumes on Market Street made it very clear to us that our proposed 8-foot sidewalk level bikeway would be under capacity from day one. That 8-foot bikeway narrowed often to 5 or 6 feet at pinch points like BART Muni entrances, loading zones, and where we had center boarding islands. So we knew it wasn't going to be adequate. We were also hit by COVID-19, and our city has been devastated by its impacts. The economy along Market Street and throughout the city has been severely impacted. Our city budget has also had dramatic impacts because of COVID-19. Our reevaluation of our design has helped us realign the design with the available funding for this first phase of construction. We also have a much smaller transit system right now, transit operations, when it was reduced to the core service plan. And even though lines have been added back, we are still under a reduced service plan. And the third consideration as we looked at Better Market Street was trying to minimize impacts to our local businesses from construction and to support their recovery post-COVID-19. So some of the key strategies to do this are keeping the existing curb line as much as possible, replacing all of the curb ramps to meet our standards, but limiting the sidewalk replacement to only where it's needed most, and replacing broken bricks mid-block. We've also decided to defer or delay replacement of the Path of Gold poles and the traction power duct banks, since they still have 10 to 15 years of useful life. This work, the utility relocation and replacing the brick sidewalks really were adding to the construction duration and would most significantly impact businesses. So shifting gears now to the design itself, we're going to start at Plaza and describe some of the transit improvements that we're proposing. One of the biggest changes to the 2020 design is that all transit will operate in the center Muni-only lanes. So the F line and all of the bus routes will share that center lane. This means that there will be no Muni service in the curb lane and no curbside transit stops, which eliminates conflicts between buses and people bicycling, and also eliminates conflicts between passengers and the bikeway. All the center boarding islands will be fully accessible with the mini high platforms for people in wheelchairs and with disabilities to board the F-line trains. And the islands themselves will be twice as big. They will be wider and longer, wider to accommodate more passengers and longer to accommodate more buses at each of the stops. Passengers will cross to the boarding islands at signalized crossings. As you can see here, this mid-block crosswalk between Plaza and 1155 Market is fully signalized today. All the traffic signals will be fully upgraded as part of Better Market Street, and any passengers waiting to get to and from the center island would cross at this signalized location. Leaving the curb line, the existing curb line, means it will also be able to leave the existing loading zones, with the exception of one, which is here near 1155 Market. Because of the center boarding island, we are proposing shifting the existing loading zone to the east, just east of the BART Muni entrance. And you can see it kind of in the behind the bus in the corner near the traffic signal. With transit in the center lanes, this means that people on bicycles will get full use of a shared curb lane. That curb lane will be shared with taxis, delivery vehicles, and paratransit, but we'll get the full 11-foot lane for cycling. One of the things that we've done based on direct input from our key stakeholders is to add treatments that provide additional safety and additional separation to people bicycling. So you can see in this rendering that we've added a 2-foot painted buffer between the vehicle lanes, so between the Muni-only lane and the shared curb lane. Within that painted buffer, we've added raised curbs to discourage people or drivers from switching lanes. And we're also adding speed tables, which you can see in the gray shading between bicycles there. The speed tables have several benefits. First, to traffic calm the curb lane and ensure that speeds are low in the curb lane. They also will discourage drivers from turning onto Market Street. We're trying to develop a design that is self-enforcing. And if vehicles turn onto Market Street but have speed tables, they will be going slower and hopefully will be discouraged from using it as through traffic. And then we also have a double sharrow to indicate the presence of bicycles through the whole lane. A few other things that we'd like to highlight about the shared curb lane is that we are able to retain about 75% of the existing curb line. The only place where it shifts or where the sidewalk is narrowed is where we have center boarding islands and the one new loading zone. And based on our traffic counts and our estimations, there will be 75% fewer vehicles in the curb lane since we have car-free Market Street and with the new transit service plan. And as a cyclist myself, I'm looking forward to not having to share that curb lane with other buses or with any buses. Here's a little bit more on the raised curbs and the speed tables. You can see where the speed tables are placed in the curb lane, and the raised curb is in the painted buffer. So this is a sample block between 7th and 8th Streets. You see there's 2 speed tables in each direction, and the buffers are highlighted in the orange lines. To highlight some of the safety improvements for people walking and accessibility.
Your line is now unmuted.
We are replacing all of the curb ramps at all of the crosswalks. They will also be twice as wide as they are today, going from 4 feet to 8 feet. We are only replacing the sidewalk in limited locations, primarily at the corners and then mid-block where there's broken bricks or where there's gaps between bricks. We are upgrading, as I mentioned earlier, and expanding all of the center boarding islands. But I think one of the biggest benefits to people walking is that we are no longer narrowing the sidewalk to make space for the sidewalk level bikeway. People walking will have full use of the sidewalk or exclusive use of the sidewalk. This is a comparison from our 2019 design to the 2020 design. You can see on the left in the 2019 design, we were actually widening the sidewalk by 2 feet, but repurposing the first 12 feet for a 4-foot buffer and an 8-foot bikeway. And the sidewalk was narrowed by 10 feet to 25 feet. We had 2 lanes in the roadway, 11 feet and 12 feet, with transit in both of those lanes. The 2020 design on the right, we have a 35-foot sidewalk for people walking, the 11-foot shared curb lane with bicycles, taxis, commercial vehicles, and paratransit, the 2-foot buffer with the raised curb, and the 12-foot Muni-only lane. This is an example of the 2019 design and all of the locations where the bikeway narrowed. I mentioned that at BART portals, loading zones, and curbside transit stops, the bikeway narrowed to 5 or 6 feet. And you can see between 7th and 8th Streets where we have UN Plaza, there really was just a small portion of the bikeway that was the full 8 feet, because we have BART entrances, BART Muni entrances at both ends of the block and mid-block. And then we had loading zones on both sides of the street and curbside stops on both sides of the street. So we really had 8 feet in very limited locations. I'm going to shift now to the funding plan and some of the cost estimates. This is our full funding plan for all of Better Market Street. The planning phase, including 30% design and environmental review, and the design of the sidewalk level bikeway is shown in gray because that funding has already been expended. We use primarily local funds to complete environmental review and our planning phase, as well as to design the sidewalk level bikeway. With this new proposed design, we do have to go back and change a lot of the design or redesign between 5th and 8th Streets. So we estimate that that redesign will cost an additional $7 million to the project, but we'll save much more than that with the new design. We have $121 million for construction between 5th and 8th Streets, primarily using MTA's Prop A general obligation bond, but we also have $18 million in federal funds, $15 million from Build, and another $3.4 million from One Bay Area Grant, or OBAG. We're also getting almost $12 million from our Prop K half-cent sales tax, administered by the Transportation Authority. Most recently, we received an affordable housing and sustainable communities grant at almost $3 million. And then BART is contributing funds for the intersection of 8th, Grove, Hyde, and Market. And the PUC is providing ratepayer dollars to fund their sewer and water improvements. So you can see that we are really leveraging our local funds to use or to secure federal funds for the project. Previously, we had a funding gap for phase 1 construction and an even larger funding gap for the full corridor. But now with our redesign, we're saving funding, and I'll show you what that is next. But we have full funding for the construction of 5th to 8th Streets, and we have 32, almost 33 million for future phases, including the F loop. This is a comparison of our 2019 and 2020 costs. In 2019, the construction phase, including all contingency, construction management, the construction contract itself came to 191 million. The 2020 design for 5th to 8th Streets and the first construction contract, including the redesign, comes to 111 million. A portion of it between McAllister, or a portion of Market Street between McAllister and Charles J. Brenham is moved to phase 2. That's approximately 17 million. So you can see the 2020 design, including the redesign, totals 128 million. That cost savings is estimated to be 63 million just for phase 1 between 5th and 8th Streets. And when you multiply that throughout the corridor, we're saving 4 or 5 times that. We get a lot of questions about why is Market Street, or why is this first construction contract still so much money? And if you look just at the first line of the previous slide, it had the construction contract. This is a breakout of that construction contract. And what you'll see is that the majority of funding is going towards infrastructure replacement and improvements between the curb lines. The focus is really the roadway and the underground utilities. This is sorted by cost. You can see that the majority of costs at the top are going to replace the track, the streetcar track, and the traction power that supplies not only surface transit, but also the underground as well. We're fully repaving the roadway and the trackway itself. We're replacing the overhead wires. The next couple of lines are PUC with water and the auxiliary water supply system. We have almost a little over 3 million going towards landscape. And then the other elements or construction scope is again state of good repair and maintenance. We are doing a full upgrade of all of the traffic signals and replacing them, which will make them more visible and the latest, meet all of our latest standards. As far as improving the public realm and our enhancements to the corridor, it's a portion of our roadway and landscape budget. I just wanted to end with going through our project schedule. We did hit some huge milestones this year in clearing the project at the federal level, getting NEPA clearance in September. We also obligated our federal funding, the $18.4 million in build and OBAG. I wanted to highlight that our virtual open house is running now on our website and will be available through November 13th. Our next online meeting is Monday, November 9th. We'll actually have a little bit more time from 4:30 to 6 p.m. And we also are having a meeting that's hosted by Lighthouse for the Blind on November 12th. And that will be advertised by Lighthouse and the Mayor's Office on Disability. Just a look forward to what's next after Market Street between 5th to 8th. Phase 2 is the F Loop, so new streetcar track along McAllister and Charles J. Brenham. We will also be upgrading Market Street between McAllister and Charles J. Brenham as part of this contract. So this was phase 2 in the cost estimate. This new streetcar track will allow the F-line streetcar to circle back and service the waterfront where ridership is the highest more often without reducing service to the Castro. Also, west of 8th Street, we are still planning to implement the hub area design. And east of 5th Street, we're not sure yet what that design will look like. We're waiting just a little bit for the transportation recovery plan to look at, or to know what the transit operations plan will be east of 5th Street. But we're also conscious or aware of the fact that we may have different cross sections of Better Market Street in different areas, similar to what we have today and similar to what we were proposing in 2019, because the hub area design was always different from the rest of the corridor, narrowing to just one lane in each direction, which is the Muni only lane. So we are focusing our discussion today and our presentation and all of our outreach on Market Street between 5th to 8th, but we have information about the F Loop as well. We can share more information about the hub area plan, and we're just holding off on making decisions east of 5th Street. With that, my presentation is concluded. This is our website, bettermarketstreetsf.org. We invite you to go to the website for more information. These slides are available. All of our information boards are available with a lot more information. And if there are specific questions on the project or media inquiries, you can reach out to Coma or myself. I'll give it back to Coma and we'll start public comments.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you. So to begin public comment, we do have a call-in number, 1-888-363-4734. We will first go through the call-in line to see if there are any questions. And then we do see some questions from attendees via Zoom who are raising their hand or submitting it through the chat feature. You may submit your questions there and we will get to you as soon as we can. But first, let's turn it back over to Kim to go through any callers that are in the queue.
We're sorry, your request was not recognized. Please try again. We're sorry, future.
Okay, while we are figuring out the call-in line technical difficulties, we apologize for that. We will first go to John E., who has raised his hand, so we will come back to Kim. But John, I'm going to unmute you, so please prepare to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hi, John. Yes, please go ahead and ask your question.
Great, thank you for this. I'm very concerned about the Muni loop, the loop for the F Market Street line. It was slipped into this project. I've been watching this from the beginning. This is a dream that Muni had, but it was slipped into this project early on when it was a big project. I objected to that, but c'est la vie. But I noticed now that they're cutting the project back, this is still being put in there, the F Market loop, and that's. For people in the Castro, we're very concerned about that because this provides an easy way to turn the trains around and skip the Castro. So what's up with that? Why is that continuing to be in this project? Who's pushing for this? It's a huge amount of money. It's a big disturbance to a lot of people. And if we're working with a limited budget and we're trying to prioritize street safety, why are we taking millions and millions of dollars of street safety money and putting it into a loop that the F Market Street can turn back and service downtown and cut the Castro out? That's my question.
Koma, do you want me to take that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Jeff Tumlin with the SFMTA. We have no intention of cutting service to the Castro, but we need to recognize that we have about 5 times the amount of transit demand along the Embarcadero from the ferry building to Fisherman's Wharf than we do in the western part of Market. So our goal is to actually stop leaving people behind on the Embarcadero by increasing service on the F line on the Embarcadero. Unfortunately, this part of Market Street is the only place that we could find to be able to turn around. This allows us to be a lot more efficient, and we're going to continue to struggle at Muni with our operating budget for quite some time. So we're looking for ways to use our capital money in order to make our operations a lot more efficient.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we continue with the Zoom raised hand questions, we'll go back to Kim to see if there are any callers on the phone line. Okay, we seem to be experiencing more technical difficulties with the phone line. We do apologize. So we will go back to the Zoom raised hand feature. So if you have a question, please feel free to click the raise hand button, or you may submit your Q&A via the Q&A box. So we will go to our next raised hand, which is Peter Belden. So Peter, I will prepare to unmute you. So please prepare your question. Sorry, Peter, we seem to be having trouble connecting you. We're going to move on to Jane Natoli.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for the updates on this. My name's Jane Natoli. I guess less of a question. I just have some concerns about this. I mean, I get the limitations that have come up because of funding, and I understand the changes that need to be made, but you know, frankly, double sharrows don't make me feel any better than single sharrows on a stretch of road. And while we have seen some improvements with car-free Market Street, you know, I'm hoping we can maintain that. My experiences on Market have not been exceptionally great recently, unfortunately. And I guess I just have some concerns about the outreach with this, and the fact that I really don't know how to convince people who are new to riding that this is an improvement for them. I mean, I get the constraints of creating truly separated space, but I think that's transformative, especially for newer riders and less confident riders. And I really hope that we can continue to explore how we can do this. So, you know, I just want you to really think about that. I get all the constraints. I appreciate the work that everybody is doing. But I think getting market right is crucially important, and would love to see a corridor that I can point to that truly I can tell other people you will feel safe biking on it as well. So I want everyone to keep that in mind. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Okay, moving on to our next question on Zoom. We'll go to Matt Schofield.
Hi. Yeah, I had a couple of questions about potential conflicts that exist with the raised buffer in between the Muni lane and the single lane that that will exist. My question is there any like thought to putting street side fencing or something to discourage loading and non-loading zones? Just because if you have cyclists trying to get around big trucks loading, that might be an issue. And my other concern is that this design looks like it might actually, without having no through traffic zones between blocks, it might actually encourage like high-speed taxis during rush hour and stuff, as this would like open up as potential to create pretty significant conflicts between taxis and cyclists. So the possibility of bollards that can lower something potentially. Anyway, that's my question.
If I can chime in here, one of the things that we are looking at is ways that we can physically force right turns from the outside lane so that we're not reliant on enforcement. And essential to the design is actual physical traffic calming in the outside lane, so that when there is the occasional delivery truck or taxi, that vehicle cannot operate faster than bike speed. It's fortunate that the signals are timed at about an 11-mile-an-hour progression in both directions, so we can manage the travel speed in the outside corridor at bike speed without negatively impacting the taxis to delivery trucks. The other thing that we'll want advice about is thinking about time of day. We have ability to restrict deliveries by time of day. We can even take advantage of the fact that for taxis, the time when they most want access to Market Street is actually late at night, and particularly weekend evenings when, for example, the theaters are getting out. So I think there's a lot that we can talk about how do we create a space that actually accommodates the volume of cyclists that we expect and prioritizes that new user. For me, that is also actually the only important design user, because I need to manage a transportation system that is encouraging more and more people to try biking or scooters or other forms of micromobility. Those are the folks that we really have in mind. And our concern, again, is that a 5-foot cycle track on the sidewalk only accommodates cyclists riding single file, which in no way accommodates the demand. The vast majority of cyclists under the original scheme will be having to ride in the roadway in any event. More importantly, we've got concerns that if we are successful in really attracting high numbers of cyclists and scooter users, that at the corners, at the intersections, those cyclists and scooter users are going to accumulate on the sidewalk, competing for space with pedestrians and making it very difficult for pedestrians to navigate the crosswalks. We want a design that is not a compromise of 10 years ago, but actually looks to the future and uses best practices. My personal prejudices are best practices from the Netherlands, since that's where I have done the most work in bikeway design. Those are the things that we want to talk about with the public, and that we don't actually have to make a decision on today, because today we're just talking about the roadway portion between 5th and 8th. So we actually do have time to figure out what happens to the rest of the corridor and should we move the curbs or not.
Thank you, Matt. Moving on to the next question, we have Kyle. Kyle, please prepare your question.
Hello, yeah, this is Kyle Grockmal, and I think I'm one of the few bike activists who is actually happy about this change, as I always had the concerns about the bike lanes being too narrow. and even overflow traffic, bike traffic, either flowing onto the sidewalk or the main travel lane. I think that the issue that a lot of cyclists are having is the unfettered access for taxis and commercial vehicles, especially trucks. And I feel like if there were forced turns, we would be much more comfortable, or as Director Tumling is commenting, you know, restrictions on certain hours. The other part is enforcement. And we've seen lately there's been zero enforcement of turn restrictions. So I'm also wondering about the use of cameras to enforce turn restrictions. And I know we use them on Market and the 101 on-ramp to ban that right turn. So it seems like there's some precedence, and if we've explored using cameras to enforce the vehicle restrictions for taxis and for all vehicles.
Great, thank you, Kyle. Okay, going on to our next question, we have coming from Stephen Fitzsimmons. Stephen, please prepare your question.
Hey everybody, I usually go by Fitz. I'm pretty disappointed with the changes made here. Jeffrey, I'm a big fan, and hearing you say, you know, you're designing and aiming for that new rider and taking a lot of inspiration from how the Dutch build bikeways. It just really seems at odds with, you know, having cyclists be in the same lane as vehicles, and not just vehicles, but delivery trucks. I cannot picture, like, you know, a teenager, for example, or a first grader, second grader biking down Market Street next to a massive delivery truck, trying to navigate around that. It actually feels a bit disingenuous calling something a bike lane where cars are allowed at all. And truthfully, I personally would rather bike in a lane that's less wide, that is physically separated from cars, and be delayed in my commute downtown versus having to bike in a lane where I'm constantly having to navigate people getting picked up, dropped off, delivery trucks, squeezing you into the Muni lane. Now there's curbs there. It just seems like I see very little improvement. And I'm curious if you guys are still even considering a separated bike lane, or if that is completely off the table.
So I can address some of your questions. First, on whether we're still considering it or not. We are not changing our project description in our environmental documents, and we're also not changing the legislation that was approved in October of 2019. So we're, you know, those building a sidewalk level bikeway at a later time is still a possibility. But as a team, we have talked about, you know, the capacity limitations of the sidewalk level bikeway. And given that we can only provide 5 to 8 feet, you know, at 5 feet, you can only have one person biking. And with 8 feet, you could have 2 people biking side by side, but that's it. It really, really narrows your capacity. So, you know, it would be a significant impact to people bicycling. But the other thing I wanted to address was your question about delivery vehicles. And one of the things I forgot to mention was that deliveries are restricted in the peak hour, in the peak direction. So in the morning, deliveries will not be allowed, or commercial vehicles will not be allowed to make deliveries in the inbound direction. And in the PM commute hours, or PM peak, deliveries will not be allowed in the outbound or westbound direction. So it does reduce conflicts during the peak hours. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we estimate there will be 75% fewer vehicles in the curb lane now that we have all the transit in the center lanes and car-free market, or no private vehicles in the curb lane.
I'd also like to add that, of course, if we left Market Street and its configuration pretty much the same as it is now, that would be a complete failure. That's not what we want to do. But at the same time, as we look at how our different experiments with bike facilities across San Francisco have turned out, while we've implemented a lot of protected cycleways over the last 2 years, they've not succeeded in attracting nearly the level of bike ridership and diversity of bike ridership as have our slow streets or streets like JFK and Golden Gate Park. Slow streets are open to all car traffic. There's no restrictions or barely any restrictions. And even a street like JFK still has a really high volume of service trucks from the Recreation and Parks Department, as well as all the deliveries to the DeYoung loading dock, as well as pretty high frequent 44 buses doing the slalom between the Concourse and 8th Avenue. So there's a lot of traffic on streets that are wildly successful at attracting a broad array of new riders. But the streets have several factors in common, the most important of which is management of speed. We need to do a better job on our slow streets of using more physical design to manage speeds rather than just throwing up some barricades, but we've obviously been extremely limited in our resources. We can do a lot better on Market Street. Similarly, we need to use design to establish expectations. Right now, Market Street looks like it's a highway because that's kind of how it was originally designed. We can design it in a way to encourage civility, not just so that motorists respect people on bikes and scooters, but also that people on bikes and scooters respect people on foot, which is extremely important to us as well. So I think that there is a lot that we can do, even if there is still some sharing in that outside curb lane, provided we encourage civility.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. Going on to our next question, we have coming from Ira Kaplan. Ira, please prepare your question.
Hi, yeah, my name's Ira Kaplan. I live in North Beach. I don't own a car and primarily get around town on a bike. I'm just really disappointed to see these changes. They don't look like they are a significant improvement over the status quo. And the status quo doesn't feel like it's living up to its promise. There's still lots of cars on Market Street. Taxi drivers are some of the most aggressive drivers in our city and make me feel very unsafe. And the police department uses the sidewalks as a parking lot, which is pretty unfortunate. And, you know, I'm going to keep riding my bike. I'm a very confident cyclist. But a lot of, if we're trying to move people to ride bikes more, I don't think that Sharrows are going to get it done. And the designs that you've released so far, it seems like it's pretty much just Sharrows. So I'm disappointed in these changes. I feel like if the concern is that we won't have enough capacity, then the solution is to add capacity and not throw our hands up and stick with the status quo. I will leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, Ira. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties with callers calling into the toll-free number to make your comment. Again, we are taking comments via Zoom. So if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. We will be extending today's meeting for another 15 minutes to 1:15 to make up for the technical difficulties. Again, we do apologize about that. We'll continue with our questions and go to Abby Tinker. Abby, please prepare your comment.
Hi, this is Abby Tinker. I have been bike commuting down Market Street for over a decade and appreciate the changes that have occurred so far. Thank you for everybody and the hard work going into that thus far. And I'll echo other callers being a little bit disappointed that we seem to be walking away from that without much of an expression of vision of being able to get there in the future. I understand we've got a lot of constraints right now, and appreciate that it's difficult rocks and hard places for you guys to try to fit around, but having bikes and vehicles interacting is a recipe for conflicts, and we know this already, and it's dangerous and hurts and kills people in our city. And I'm particularly concerned being a new mother and wanting to bike. We don't own a car. I want to bike with my kid, and being able to be in safe or traffic protected bike only spaces is a high priority. So with that one background, I do want to ask a specific question, which is, what is the purpose of the bumps, the dividers between the bike traffic lane and the Muni only lane? Is it to keep bikes from going into the Muni lane? Is it to, how does that keep us more safe? Because my initial reaction to those is that it constrains bikers' flexibility. It could be dangerous when you're trying to avoid an interaction, a conflict with a car, and you hit a bump that could destabilize you, take you down in the middle of two lanes. Thank you.
So we added the raised curb in response to concerns with separation between the vehicle lanes. So the raised curb is meant to keep the transit vehicles in the Muni only lane and to keep taxis, commercial vehicles, and paratransit, as well as people bicycling in the curb lane. What we don't want is taxi drivers to try to avoid the speed tables by going into the Muni only lane. We also want to discourage people bicycling from riding in the Muni only lane, which is the track lane. And we also want to discourage private vehicles from turning onto Market Street and using the curb lane. So we want to, we're trying to use these additional treatments to clearly indicate where everyone belongs and to keep, keep people in their designated lanes.
That said, it's something that it's one of the many factors that we need to continue to look at. And in fact, we're interested in doing some shorter term quick build experimentation around. I don't want to understate how much we learned back in January with our quick build and how that is influencing our thinking about potential design alternatives in order to achieve our common goals. I think everyone on this call probably has pretty close to exactly the same goals for Market Street.
Thank you, Jeff. And moving on to our next question. Sadiq Prahan, please prepare your question.
Hello. Hi. My name is Sadiq Pradhan, and as a San Franciscan who does not own a car, I am extremely disappointed by these changes. Shares do not make people feel safe while biking, especially people who are new riders that haven't been biking around the city for years. One of my good friends lives in Soma without a car and has felt trapped at home during the Muni service cuts. She briefly felt comfortable biking during shelter in place when car volume was near zero, but she hasn't been on the roads since then when she has to share the roads with the vehicles. And I have a hard time telling her that she's wrong and she should feel fine. Paint is not protection, and riding single file is infinitely preferable to being punished past or straight up run over. If the concern is that an 8-foot lane is not wide enough for cyclist volume, we should be adding more cyclist infrastructure, either by widening the bike-only lane or by adding a parallel protected lane on Mission Street. You wouldn't remove car lanes because there's too much traffic or remove parking spaces because nobody can find parking, so don't remove safe bicycling infrastructure because it's widely used. It's very disappointing to suddenly take away this infrastructure over stakeholder and bike coalition objections at the very last second after such a long process. This isn't some abstract point. It can be a literal issue of life and death for the Vision Zero goals that we're falling very short of. I don't want to have a City Hall Valley in my memory like Tess Frosting got a year and a half ago. I just want to be able to get around my city safely. Thank you very much, and I really hope you reconsider these changes.
Thank you. Coma, I think we have 3 people on the phone line. We're not able to manage the calls, but I think callers could speak one at a time, introduce themselves. We can only see their phone number. So if you could introduce yourself and ask your question, we should be able to hear you.
So we'll go back to Kim to see if we were able to get questions on the phone queue.
I think if you're a caller, if you've dialed the 1-800 number, the 888 number, you can go ahead and try speaking now. The other callers will just need to mute so that there's no feedback. Is there a caller on the 888 number that would like to speak? You could go ahead and do that.
I think we are still having technical difficulties with the AT&T bridge line, so we do apologize about that. We will continue in going down the raised hand. So we do have 15 people still with their hands raised, so thank you for your patience. We will get to you in the order in which you raise your hand. We will move on to Parker. Please prepare your question. Parker, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I just got a notification I was muted, but I unmuted myself now, so. Hi, so I'm Parker Day. I live at Valencia Market, and so I'm kind of in the thick of it with what's happening on Market Street. It's a route that I ride, bike, walk, take transit on usually daily. And I'm really disappointed with what I'm seeing so far because I think there's so much emphasis being put on the rush hour commute volumes of riders that you're kind of leaving the rest of us in the dust. Those of us that live and play and go and do things on Market outside of those commute hours, because we're not talking about like a slow street here like Page Street. Market has delivery vehicles on it every hour of every day. You know, it's not that we're talking about occasional delivery or taxi vehicles. Market has a significant number of transit routes on it. So to treat it like a slow street, I think is flawed. I don't think that matches up with Dutch infrastructure. I don't think that a road would look like this in the Netherlands, to be frank. Not a road that is serving this type of purpose. And I think that a protected bike lane is really important for those of us who are using Market Street outside of commute hours, because I know right now I'm gonna end up behind a taxi that's loading with a box truck behind me on my bike, feeling vulnerable with this design. And to spend $111 million for 3 blocks and still have that type of problem, I think is unconscionable, to be honest. My mom's not gonna ride on this version of Market Street, and that's unfortunate. I'm going to keep riding on it, and she's gonna be worried about me. So, yeah. And can I just say one last little quick note about the process? I feel like this process has been, for the 2020 redesign, been really rushed. I don't feel like there's been enough outreach. There's a pandemic going on. There's only these 2 open houses for this really significant redesign from the 2019 plan. So I'm just I'm also disappointed in the process. So that's it for my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Parker, for your comments. Moving on to the next raised hand, we have John Bate. John, please prepare your comment.
Hello, my name is John Bate. I'm from the advocacy group Streets for People, and I want to speak in opposition to the removal of bike lanes from the Better Market Streets plan. We've heard a lot about how the quantity of bicycles that will use Market Street are greater than the amount that could be accommodated by the previously agreed upon bike lane. There's a simple solution to this issue that does not require removing the protected bike facility, and that is to continue to allow cyclists to use the curb lane in addition to the newly constructed protected bike lane. This way, faster and less risk-averse cyclists can use the traffic lane, while slower and more risk-averse cyclists can use the protected bike lane. Think of this as similar to the faster Fell Street bike lane, parallel to the slower Panhandle path. It seems crazy that the response to a high amount of expected bike traffic is to reduce the capacity of the street to accommodate cyclists. Additionally, if SFMTA believes that the amount of traffic in the curb lane will not be significant enough to create a danger for cyclists, then the SFMTA should have that traffic use the center lanes currently reserved for Muni, so that the curb lane can be converted into a true protected bike lane. Just last night, I was almost hit by a taxi while cycling in the curb lane on Market Street, so the idea that allowing taxis to share that lane with cyclists is going to feel remotely safe for less experienced cyclists seems to be completely ridiculous. Advocates and planners have worked in good faith for the past 10 years to produce a plan that works for all stakeholders, and reopening the project once it is completed and ripping out the compromise that was thrashed out through an extensive public process really breaks the social contract between city government and the public. It raises the question of why we as advocates should engage in the public process if years and years of unpaid hard work can simply be thrown out at the whim of the DPW and the SFMTA. By all means, change the public process in the future if you think it isn't working, but don't go back to previous projects and change the rules that you've previously made us all play by. In particular, it seems remarkable that all the sidewalks amenities have been removed from the blocks between 5th and 8th Street, an area that abuts the low income and minority community of the Tenderloin, with very little outreach to them or to anyone else. Minority communities have good historical reasons for distrusting the public planning process due to systemic racism that has long been present in that process. And what's happening right now kind of seems to be a continuation of that. Finally, if funding is an issue, please reformulate Better Market Street into a staged project that can implement these improvements in phases rather than eliminating elements of the project altogether. It seems likely that we will soon have a President Biden and potentially some stimulus funding coming early next year. This would be made available for shovel-ready projects, which currently includes Better Market Street. If you reopen the project and start removing components, it will not be possible to construct them when funding becomes available in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, John. We will continue with our list of attendees with their hands raised. So we do want to remind we are extending our meeting to 1:15. So thank you all for your patience as we work through these technical difficulties. We do remind speakers to please keep their comments to 1 to 2 minutes. We will move on to our next raised hand, which is Justin Bigelow. Justin, please prepare your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Justin. I am an advocate with Livable City and wanted to express my disappointment up until I heard Director Tumlin talk about actual design and structural changes that will enforce right turns and create a shared space in the travel lane or curb lane. I think that makes sense, and that's what we need to hear about in order to think about this redesign of the previously approved project. Without knowing what those elements are, there really isn't a lot to talk about or comment on. I will add an additional comment that it doesn't make sense to add a curb between the Muni lane and the travel lane or curb lane, especially if we're not certain what the design is going to be. So I really was excited when Director Tumlin talked about the quick implementation, which it seems like you could do today with soft hit posts and see if it works to discourage travel that's not needed in the Muni lane right now. The last comment I wanted to note was that my biggest fear is we're going to have 3 blocks of Market Street that are not going to look like any other aspect of Market Street. When Director Tumlin mentioned that separated bike paths are not creating the amount of ridership that's required or aspirationally thought of, I think about the lack of corridor-based planning. And so my strong hesitancy on the 2020 revise is that we're going to have 3 blocks of Market Street with a shared lane, and maybe later on we'll have separated bike paths at the curb level or sidewalk level, and it's not going to be intuitive to anyone. That's a problem that San Francisco bike infrastructure has because we don't have corridor-wide intuitive designs. And I don't see how we're going to achieve that with a 3-block process. So I encourage a lot of caution and a lot more detail about the forced right turns. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. Moving on to our next raised hand, we have Vanessa Gregson. Vanessa, please prepare your comment.
Hi there. I actually don't call in often for public comment, so I'm a little nervous, but.
Oops, sorry, Vanessa, you muted. Could you please unmute yourself?
Okay. Did you catch any of what I said in the beginning? Or no? I'll start over. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I regularly, pre-pandemic, was commuting down Market, as most people do, and in between running errands and such. And I actually stopped commuting in 2019 because the conflicts between personal vehicles, taxis, trucks, deliveries were too high for me to feel safe. And I just purely only took Muni until January 2020, which was a really bright spot for, I think, me and so many others. And seeing this come to fruition earlier this year was just celebratory, and seeing the number of cyclists that were out was really encouraging. And I think that what's getting lost in this conversation is that the intention of the cycle track was that, you know, people could use the cycle track on the sidewalk, but also could use the car lane or the street lane. I mean, you know, the other lanes of travel to commute on bike. And so maybe more confident cyclists could use that lane, and then those who are still learning or feel more comfortable using the cycle track could use that. So there were multiple options for people in this initial design, which allowed for people to become confident riding their bike in San Francisco, which I thought was really great. And so I think designing or thinking about this in a way that, you know, is restricting that ability for people to use those safer areas to travel down Market Street is really frustrating. And you know, I'm not as well spoken as John. I think John really hit the nail on the head in terms of just all of the concerns that I also have about Market Street. But the other piece here is the design process, this redesign. Market Street, you know, so went through 10 years of this review and process and working with the community. And then, you know, obviously we're in a new time here with the pandemic, but I would really encourage that you maybe extend the public comment period to be longer, or allow more public comment on this new redesign, because it's going to impact so many of us. And I would love just to be able to share this with others who have been thinking about commuting, and allow them to also weigh in on this process. I'm not a super confident public comment giver, and I just was so frustrated that I had to speak up. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment, Vanessa. Okay, moving on. So again, we want to remind people we will be extending the duration due to the amount of speakers we have with their hands raised. We want to thank our directors again, Alaric and Director Jeff Tomlin from SFMTA, and Alec DeGraff and Reed from Public Works for joining us. We will be extending our question and answer period until 1:30. If you're able to stay on with us, we invite you to. We do want to thank our directors, and if they have to excuse themselves, we just want to acknowledge that, or if they would like to stay on as well. But we will move forward and go on to our next hand raise, which is Heidi Peterson. Heidi, please prepare your comment.
Hi, thank you for all your work. I do appreciate that this plan would involve not having to share with the buses, as I often play leapfrog with the 5 biking downtown. So and all the work generally. But I do have to echo the comments about sharing with cars being scary. I find it especially scary right now. I feel like people are driving more aggressively. I've experienced that on this section of Market in the last few weeks. Yeah, so I have this dream of a city where, like, you know, some tourists or some kids could just be like, oh, let's bike from the Castro down to Fisherman's Wharf. Let's bike to Valencia. Just like have it an easy, like, one bike lane. Like, Market Street is such a good street. It could be so good, but having to share with cars is never as joyful as a car-free bike ride. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment, Heidi. So again, we have 12 additional speakers with their hands raised, and I'm just going to read their names just so you know the order we have. We have Alice, which will be next. I will unmute you in 1 second. We have Cole, Paul, and then the initials KH. So Alice, please prepare your comment.
Hi, my name's Alice, and I live in the Outer Sunset, and I bike frequently on Market Street in the middle of the day. I appreciate that you guys are working within severe budget constraints and like changed conditions, and I appreciate how you're considering ways to use the current sidewalks, which saves construction time and a significant amount of money. I will, however, second a lot of concerns about biking around huge delivery trucks and taxis. I have to say some slower streets have been hugely successful, but on Ortega, for example, which is near where I live, it's technically a slower street, but so many cars continue to drive on it that no one feels comfortable. I very rarely see people walking in the middle of the street or biking in the middle of the street because cars come down so often, and it's effectively not a slow street. Very little has changed. And so I am concerned about if it's like education to make sure that drivers are aware that a bike's there, or that it's not a space that's designed for them, but for them to share, or if it's about like how you design the street so that they have to go slower, or like whatever it is. I'm concerned that sharrows are not sufficient, because sharrows really do nothing to protect you as a biker, and drivers often really just ignore them. So I appreciate that you're trying to design for more bikes than were initially planned and within limited budgets, but like near sharrows and sort of an unregulated slow streets model, I don't think will really keep us safe.
Alistair, your comments are very similar to many that we've heard, and I just want to emphasize that I agree with you 100%. On almost all projects, sharrows are simply an admission of failure. That's not what we want here. Sharrows need to signify to cyclists like that they belong. I think, you know, we have some reasonably good use of sharrows through the wiggle, but the wiggle itself, I would also argue, is not where it needs to be, because we still have not designed the wiggle in order to slow car traffic down to bike speed. In order for a shared lane to work on Market Street and for it to serve the essential delivery functions, but also accommodate the bike volume that we're expecting, we have to design it with people first in mind, starting with pedestrians, making sure that they have safe space on the sidewalk, and then making sure that cyclists of all levels, but particularly new cyclists and inexperienced cyclists, really feel comfortable taking that curb lane, and that the design of the street makes it very clear to anyone in a big motor vehicle that people on bikes have the right of way, and that they're allowed in as guests only insofar as they're respectful guests. And I think one of the things that I'm learning from all these comments is the necessity of actually doing some quick build experimentation now before this project begins, in order to show what we can do and learn more about the critical design details that are necessary to create the environment that we're looking for. But thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Alice. Okay, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Again, we have 11 attendees with their hands raised. I will read the names of the next 5 that will be coming up. So we have Cole speaking next, Paul, KH, Dot, and Peter Johnson. So Cole, please prepare your comment. Sorry, just 1 second, Cole. There seems to be an issue with your service. Just 1 second. Okay, Cole, you should be able to speak and unmute.
Great. This is Cole Rose, and I used to live at 8th and Mission when this project started. So I've been involved in it for a long time, and it's still very close to home. This looks like it's now an infrastructure maintenance project with really incidental place and mobility benefits, active mobility benefits. I don't like describing myself as a less confident or a more vulnerable bike rider, and I'm certainly not new to it, but I'm a reasonable bike rider and I want to be safe, and I don't feel safe around taxis and commercial vehicles. Commercial vehicles are usually 11 feet or 10 feet wide and have massive blind spots, and nothing about a speed table keeps me out of a truck's blind spot. So I really don't want to see a shared bike lane on this project. There's nothing magical about a raised bike lane, but I want to see something that precludes motor vehicles the way a raised bike lane precludes motor vehicles, and that includes taxis and commercial vehicles. I don't want to share space with them, and I don't think that that's too much to ask. The most vulnerable users don't conform to commute hours, so allowing commercial vehicles some of the time still puts a lot of people at risk. And on a separate point, the removing all of the street amenities from the Tenderloin and Soma adjoining portion of Market Street strikes me as really unfair and unfortunate. I think that neighborhood deserves benches, deserves public amenities, deserves features that were promised in this plan and that were approved unanimously by the Board of Supervisors in October of last year. So those are the things that I want to see in this project. I want to see amenities for those critical neighborhoods, and I want to see a bike lane that's actually protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Cole. Okay, moving on to our next speaker, we have Paul Valdez. Paul, please prepare your comment. Paul, could you please unmute, share your comment? Okay, not hearing from Paul, we will move on to our next speaker to continue our Q&A. We have KH. KH, please prepare your comment.
Hi there. Can you hear me? It's my first time on Zoom.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. My name is Cash. I own a bike shop on Market Street, and I'm a founding member of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, and I have been advocating for a car-free Market Street since the mid-1980s, and I support this project. It seems like the people with the concerns are mostly theoretical or paternalistic worries about other people's experiences. Please, everybody.
Sorry, Cash, you appear to be muted. Could you please unmute?
Okay, how's that? Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Please
Sorry
continue.
about that. Right now, I see whole families taking advantage of car-free market by bicycling on Market Street. You can take your kids and you can take your grandmother. They'll be safe. It's okay. It seems like the people with concerns about this project are mostly theoretical and they haven't really looked at what the project is going to do. If everybody would, before taking a position, do their homework, take a deep breath and actually ride on Market Street and get a feel for it, I think that would help. I'd also like everybody to really look at the new plan with an open mind. We don't need separated lanes when the street itself is car-free. We're getting an 11-foot wide green lane the entire length of the project. It's wider than the old plan, and there are no narrow pinch points like the old plan. And for the people who are worried about loading and unloading, there are turnouts where those box trucks goes. They're not going to be in the lane. They're going to be off to the side. If you'd stop and visualize how wide 11 feet is, it's twice the width of an automobile. It's wide enough to allow for 4 bicyclists to ride abreast and ample room for bikes to pass each other safely. It's way better because it scales up in a way the old plan couldn't, because when people start riding to work again, we'll have room for all the bikes. I know people are hung up on separated bike lanes, but the reality is people do rise to the occasion. They've been riding on car-free streets all over the world when those are implemented. And when we only have the taxis and the commercial drivers, what you'll find is they're extremely courteous because they no longer have to fight the hellish traffic of private motor vehicles. We're in an economic crisis right now, not seen since the Great Depression. And this isn't business as usual and bikes getting shafted. Everybody's going to have to sacrifice if our city is going to survive. Let's keep things in perspective. We're getting a car-free Market Street. We've won. It's what we've been fighting for over 40 years. Let's take the victory. Let's get out and ride. Anybody who wants to come down to my shop and go for a ride on Market Street, if they feel unsafe, I have taught people how to ride, adults, how to ride their very first bike ride on Market Street. And after they get out there, they're fine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Cash. We'll go back to Paul. Paul Valdez, could you please see if you can unmute and make your comment? Paul, I see you're unmuted. Can you? There may be an issue with your microphone. We do apologize if you're having trouble talking. But we will move on to our next speaker to continue on. We have Dot. I will unmute you. Please prepare your comment. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This is very frustrating. You should all be ashamed. This is not meaningful public involvement. I feel like you're wasting my time, so you can expect me to return the favor. First question, who's moderating the questions? I don't recognize the voice of the person that was moderating the callers. Can you identify yourself, please?
Sure, my name is Komate.
Got it. Okay. This event was not listed under MTA meetings and events, and I asked about it during the MTA board meeting yesterday, and there was no response. The Better Market Street website said that this open house would be on Skype, but it seems to be only on Zoom. It's very confusing. The phone number to call in on Zoom is not a toll-free number or a 415 number. It's a number out of San Jose that limits participation. The Zoom login required an email address, so I had to make up an email address because I don't use email. That's another restriction or limitation on public participation. The PowerPoint presentation that I saw Christina give some of earlier, can that be posted on the Better Market Street website? And if it's there, can you please point me to exactly where it is? Because I looked for it and did not see it. All I saw was the lengthy storyboard thing, which was not PowerPoint. I have a substantive question about the F-line loop at 7th Street North, Charles Brenham. I thought initially that that was going to be outbound to either direction, but then I thought it was redesigned to be bidirectional so that an F-line car could travel from Castro and then make a hard left onto McAllister. But it looks like that feature is not in the current design. Am I understanding that correctly? And if so, what happened to that design feature or project feature? Next, I've attended past meetings and requested mailed notice, and I did not get any mailed notice about this virtual open house or this 2-week period with these get-togethers. And I may have more questions and comments. Can you please tell me who the primary contacts at DPW and MTA are? I have COMA as an outreach person at either 554-6956 or 558-5283, but I suspect that those have been superseded by a new 628 number. I have Christina Olea as the project manager, probably also has a new 628 number. I have Mariana McGuire as an outreach person at MTA with a 415-302 number. I don't know who the current project manager is at MTA or the current transit contact at MTA. I understand that Ian Trout is not currently working on this project. Those are my current comments and questions. And in case you haven't figured it out, this is the David Pilpel. Thanks.
Hi, David. Thank you for your comments. I'll try to get most of them. I apologize for the confusion with our meeting invitation. We were planning to use Skype and then had some last minute technical difficulties. And so we did make the switch to Zoom, and it seems to be working well. I apologize for the San Jose number. That seems odd. I didn't notice that. So we'll double check on the phone number. We will post the presentation on the Better Market Street SF website, so you can get it directly from there and you don't have to go to the story map site. We did all of our outreach for this, or our notification for this public meeting via email to our distribution list and through our partners. We didn't mail a notice, but we will, we can look into that for the future meetings. The F loop, two things. I was going to share my screen quickly just to give everyone our contact information. We have switched, or we have moved offices. And so the best way to reach us is via email, coma.tay@sfdpw.org or christina.c.olea@sfdpw.org. For MTA, we have Peter Gabancho and Britt Tanner as project managers. But if you have questions about the project, you can reach out to COMA or myself directly. The F loop. So I was going to go back quickly to this design. The way it is designed right now is we have the westbound tracks that veer onto McAllister and then loop around Charles J. Brenham and go back out to eastbound Market Street. We are providing, I believe, the curved track to also go westbound on Market from Charles J. Brenham. But I think your question was about eastbound Market turning on to McAllister. And I do believe that turn was removed. And I see Britt joined us. Do you have more information on that maneuver?
Yeah. So the reason why we removed the turn back loop going from eastbound was partly because it would be very occasionally used. The times in which we need to turn back trains going towards the Castro, it's typically because we can't get past an event happening at UN Plaza. So it was partially just not an effective use of approximately $5 million or more to build that turnback loop. But also because having that curve right there presented an issue for bikes coming in off of McAllister, and it would have created an awkward curve that people biking would have had to cross at a strange angle. And so there was a chance that they would wipe out on that. And also, as you can see in this drawing, there's a crosswalk that's on the west side of Market just south of Jones that we are opening up. That crosswalk is currently closed. It's next to the word existing. And we were not able to open that up when we had that turn back track turning off of Market there, because there would have been a switch in the crosswalk, which would have been a hazard. And so for all of those reasons, we determined it was best to remove that additional turn back option that was going to be very rarely used.
Can I follow up on 2 of those points?
I believe we are only giving people 2 minutes to speak, and there are still 9 people in the queue.
Okay, can I
David,
just get a
can
phone
I-
number then for Christina?
David, I don't even have my new phone number memorized. I'm sorry, but
Okay,
I will.
I'll find it and I will call you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, David.
Thank you, David. Okay, moving on to our next speaker. We'll try Paul Valdez again. Paul, could you please unmute your mic? Okay, Paul, I do see you unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Okay, sorry, Paul, so we cannot hear you, so we will move on to our next speaker. We do apologize. Please feel free to email your question to bettermarketstreet@sfdpw.org. And that goes to anybody who is still with us. We thank you for your patience as we work through the remaining questions. So we will move on to Peter Johnston. Peter?
Cool. So I wanted to start off by thanking the project team for the explanations around the changes made to the Better Market Street project in 2020. These are definitely been like some tough changes to swallow, but I feel like I have a really good understanding of all the changes or the rationale behind the changes. And next, I wanted to direct a comment at Christina and the rest of the project team. I think the thing that's most important about making this project successful for cyclists, and I'm one of these cyclists, I started riding during the pandemic actually, is ensuring that the curb lane is first and foremost a bike space where taxis and trucks are guests and not vice versa. I think a lot of folks are reacting quite negatively to the sharrows for good reason. Like as Director Tumlin mentioned earlier, they were in a mission of failure. I think it's going to be really important to do things beyond the sharrow. So I like the tabletops that will slow cars down. I like the idea of colorized pavement, say like green or tan or some other like non-automobile color. I really like the idea of the mandatory like concrete enforced right turns at every block. Anything that we can do to turn that curb lane into a bike space first, I think is going to be the criterion that determines the success or failure of the project. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, moving on to Tom McWhite. Tom, please prepare your comment.
Hello. First of all, I'd just like to really express appreciation for the earlier stages of this project. Reading through the years and years of community input and how it was designed for all people and all street users and sidewalk users is pretty inspiring of something that seemed to be done right. In terms of just the actual experience and safety of sharrows, I think riding in a sharrow is something that doesn't intuitively make sense to me. It seems insane and scary and terrifying and unsafe. And I was hoping that there would be research that said that it wasn't. It's very hard to find anything of that sort. It really doesn't seem like the numbers bear out any advantage to shared lanes. And I think in terms of the main specifications that this is following, so the uniform traffic control devices and NACDO's recommendations, it doesn't really seem like this fits any of the use cases where sharrows would be useful. For example, where there is on-street parking and you don't want people to drive near the door zone, or where you're connecting low traffic parts of a bicycle network. Most of these things, they just don't seem to apply to this plan. So I'm kind of wondering, like, how do we anticipate safety working if there's any data or experience that supports that?
In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we do have some of that data and we can go ahead and put it on our website that shows recommended bikeway widths based on volumes. But we'll put it on our website just so that we can get more of the callers. We are at time, but I think we have several more callers. So if we could maybe just take quick questions quickly and run through run through our list.
Sure, we have 4 remaining hands raised, so we'll move through them. Great. Thank you, Tom, for your comment. Next in the queue is Zach. Zach Lipton, please prepare your comment.
Hi, thanks so much. And I appreciate you taking the time to get through everyone in the queue. I live on Market Street near the Phase 1 area. I travel down it by pretty much every mode of transportation, including injuring myself cycling on Market Street when passing a double parked car. Looking at the plan now, after following this process for years, I'm really disappointed how much has been changed at the last minute. Other commenters have really addressed this, but I'll just say that your own renderings show cyclists being menaced by a taxi and a box truck, as car-free Market Street never really delivered on its promise to actually be car-free. I honestly don't think there's a conceivable design that's capable of convincing drivers that they are really guests on Market Street. Drivers make illegal turns, they ignore restrictions, they park in bike lanes, they run over barriers with impunity pretty much constantly everywhere in the city. Nothing SFMTA has done anywhere gives me confidence that this will be different. If you do proceed with this design, I'd ask that there be a specific number of vehicles per hour that are allowed on market as a design criteria, with specific plans set if that number is ever exceeded for what will be done to remedy the situation. But my question's about costs. This is over $40 million a block and years of construction to not meaningfully improve Market Street's safety, transit, or appearance. What exactly is going on at the Department of Public Works that causes you to ruin at astronomical cost and delay pretty much every transit and bike project in the city? So I'm wondering specifically if the costs are so high in part because of the Phase 1 project area is only 3 blocks. To spend, say, $10 million a mile just to refurbish the overhead wire system seems really high. And I'm wondering if it was possible to refurbish all of the overhead wires on Market Street at once rather than dividing it up, if the overall cost would be lower. I guess I just don't understand why there's such a desire to move forward so quickly with 3 blocks when looking at Van Ness, looking at 2nd Street, looking at so many of DPW's projects. I can't trust you to ever finish the rest of Market Street. Thank you.
Again, we're short on time, but I put the slide back up with construction costs. The cost is not connected to the length of the project. It is connected to the amount of work that we are doing. So fully replacing all the streetcar track between 5th and 8th Streets, replacing the traction power system, repaving both the curbway and the trackway, replacing all of the overhead wires, replacing water and sewer lines, and lining or repairing some of the existing pipes, the auxiliary water supply system. So we still have a lot of work that is happening within these 3 blocks, primarily between the curbs. But it is just, how it adds up. It makes me think of like my credit card. Like every time I get my credit card bill, it's like, how did this get so high? And you just kind of look at your grocery, how much you spent at the grocery store and how much you spent on a few items, and it quickly adds up. And that sort of, this is the breakdown of all of the work and all of the funding that is going towards repairing and replacing our infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Moving on to our next speaker, Kelly Shields. Kelly, please prepare your remarks.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shields. I am primarily a bicyclist. I'm also a pedestrian and I use public transit. A car-free Market Street was a major improvement for our city, but this newly revised plan is dangerous for cyclists. We need dedicated bike lanes and we need truly car-free spaces. I have a 13-month-old baby, and the revised plan does not adequately address pedestrian or bicycle safety. It puts us in greater danger while we are biking and walking along Market Street. I'm asking that you bring back the better designs that were a decade in the making and make Market Street a better, more reliable, safer space for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kelly. Moving on to our next speaker. So we have two more speakers in our queue, and then we will wrap up today's public meeting. So we thank you for your patience and for those that are still with us. So Ben Temple, please prepare your comment.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Ben. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Let me preface this that many of my concerns have been spoken by others, as I wrote in the chat, but I would like to reiterate some of my concerns for those listening in and just for the record. As a bicyclist who commutes from the Inner Sunset into Soma, I'm very disappointed in these changes. I regularly ride on Market Street, but I'm a confident cyclist. My wife, on the other hand, does not feel safe on Market Street when there are cars on it. She feels somewhat better when I'm there to help ensure she feels safe, meaning that I put myself physically between her and the cars with my body and force cars to give us the minimum 3 feet that they are required by law to give. But what is happening to this plan will likely further weaken her ability or desire to ride on Market Street without my protection, especially as we introduce a newborn in the next several months. Sharing a road with cars is a guaranteed danger, and it cannot, in my mind, be an acceptable end goal for Market Street to actually be better. I also want to echo the disappointment in both the process and end result of this rushed redesign. We have worked so long and hard for this project, and in a short 3 weeks, it has been rewritten with little input from the very community that helped make the original plan. Either this plan doesn't appear to actually address the issues that Market Street currently has, or at least it's unclear to me how. There's little to no enforcement of non-taxis in the current version of Market Street, and this will continue. Until cars or taxis are unable to use Market Street as a through street, this won't change. I know unrelated, but the same thing applies to safe streets. If a street is not a through street, it must be enforced through physical changes to the road that make it impossible to use it as a through street. Old Town in Sacramento solves this issue by forcing cars to turn right or left at the intersections for streets that are single directional. I would love for barriers like this to be implemented in the current slow streets, and also a possible solution for the current vision for a better Market Street that would prevent taxis or delivery drivers to be able to use Market Street as a through street, but would instead force them to perform their pickup or drop off or whatever on the one block that they have access to. And finally, I'd like to reiterate my complete disappointment in the process that this pretty extensive revision to better Market Street has gone through to this point. The speed of pushing it through, the lack of public input, it's very frustrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And our final speaker for today will be Alex. Alex, please prepare your comment.
How you doing, folks? My name's Dave Alexander. I help organize with the Richmond Family Transportation Network. And the first question I asked about these transportation projects is, would one of my families or our families feel comfortable using Market Street? And I think, well, I'm not gonna make a guess here. My first gut reaction is that this is a compromise in the backs of bike riders. I also have major concerns about the process. This feels like it was pushed. 10 years distilled into 3 weeks. It's a little bit, it's a bit outrageous in my opinion. Also, Director Tumlin yesterday mentioned at the Board of Directors meeting that he wants to invest in active transportation because of the lack of funding that Muni is receiving. Well, this is a great opportunity for that. Also, building a safe, healthy Market Street to attract tourists and people on bikes plus pedestrians, because Market is the crown jewel of San Francisco. Let's get creative, movable bollards, other options on the table. Let's pilot some, but again, physical infrastructure. Also, lastly, can this process wait until later on this fiscal year when the budget forecasting is more clear? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That concludes all of our questions and comments for this public meeting. Christina?
Thanks, Koma. Seeing that it's 1:45, I'd like to go ahead and close the meeting. We did get all of your comments in the chat. Mariana has been responding to a lot of you. and we'll make sure that we get back to everyone. I also see that we had questions as well, so we'll respond to the questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate all of your comments, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, our open house, virtual open house, is available on our website, bettermarketstreetsf.org, through November 13th. And we have another online meeting Monday, November 9th at 4:30 p.m. I think it will also be on Zoom. So I think it will be a similar link, and everything will be available on our website. Thank you again.
Thank you all for joining us. We'll now end the meeting. Thank you.